Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is CJ, the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 2021 Canadian federal elections. Now, I will preface this by saying something. I'm not going to really be covering international politics that much on my channel. I am by no means an expert, even on American politics. I'd like to say I know a thing or two. But in terms of international politics, I'm really not that well versed, so I won't be covering international politics routinely. I like to keep my focus on the United States and domestic issues and stuff like that. But I think this election is particularly relevant. These are our neighbors to the north, and I have actually somewhat been following this race, which is kind of why I decided to make a video on it. I was going to actually release my Virginia election video today, another video on Virginia. That'll come out tomorrow. But we're going to take a look at the Canadian federal election results here right now. I've pulled up some of the polling that we've seen. This election was only called 5 weeks ago, so there was barely a campaign season this election. And a lot of the parties really didn't do a whole lot of big rallies or events because of the the fourth wave of COVID that's been going on in Canada. A lot of the parties didn't really want to do any in-person stuff. There were some events, obviously. The People's Party had really big rallies, but as we're going to see tonight, it didn't really amount to a whole lot, although it is a bit significant, so we'll get into that. So if we start off at the polling year, when Trudeau called the snap election, for the most part, his party was in the lead in the vast majority of polls. That started to change around the end of August, where the Conservatives, for the most part, had the lead, even after the French leaders debate. Consistent lead, and then finally, once we hit September, things really start to change and the polls are basically neck and neck, which typically will help the party in power, which were the Liberals. As we can see by the graph, the same thing is exemplified. Conservatives, throughout August, were riding pretty high, and it seems like Trudeau could actually lose. He wouldn't be prime minister anymore. The Conservatives had pretty decent leads, 6-point leads, 5-point leads in some of these polls, and that quickly dwindled to now where Liberals were having the 5-point leads, and the Conservatives were having the much smaller leads. Taking a look at tonight's election map and how things turned out, and we're going to compare them to 2019. So far, and again, not all the votes are in. A lot of these are projections. Some of the votes, as of the recording of this video, which is late at night on early morning, I should say, September 21st, there are still a few ridings that have yet to be called. But as of right now, the Conservative Party has 34% of the vote, 5.4 million votes, and the Liberal Party has 32.2. So the Conservative Party has won the popular vote. Although Canada has a parliamentary system, that doesn't mean anything at all. The People's Party, which was actually, made a lot of noise and a lot of attention, they only got 292,000 votes in the last election. They got 812,000, but since it's a parliamentary system, they don't have proportional representation. The People's Party is going to get no seats tonight. The People's Party leader, I think his name is Maxwell Bernier in Quebec. I don't even know where his riding is, so I don't even want to try. It's somewhere near Quebec City. He ended up losing. Actually, I think I found it. Yeah, the leader of the... No, that's a different Bernier. Whatever. The leader of the People's Party, which, if you're not familiar, is basically a party further right, the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party leader, Erin O'Toole, was essentially basically the same as Trudeau policy-wise. He reminds me a lot of an American politician, Phil Scott, in Vermont. He's very liberal, even for, I'd say, Canadian conservative standards. Certainly a huge contrast from the former Conservative leader, Andrew Scheer, who, was very right-wing for somebody like, somebody in Canada. Also seemed very libertarian to me. I remember reading back in 2019, he was talking about getting Canada out of the UN or something. I don't know if that was just a hit piece or whatnot, but he seemed fairly right-wing, and the Conservatives did a 180 with their leader and seemingly the direction they're going in. And it didn't really get them anywhere. They held their own. And in places like Alberta, which I know is basically a conservative stronghold, Alberta, Saskatchewan, even Manitoba, I guess, in the southern region. But in places like Alberta, specifically in Edmonton, conservatives lost ground to the NDP and the Liberals. If we compare it to 2019, and again, the province totals don't really matter that much because, again, it's not like an electoral college system. It doesn't really mean anything. But I think it is interesting that the NDP only had one seat in Alberta back in 2019, and now they have two, and the Liberals also have a seat. But when we pull up these results, the People's Party took a decent amount of the vote from the Conservatives. Both of these seats, this guy could have easily won his re-election, and same here. But there was a lot of reasons why the Conservative Party and the People's Party gained momentum. The Conservative Party, I think COVID was a big issue during the campaign. The whole issue of vaccine passports was a big deal. And I think Erin O'Toole basically embraced those in the latter part of the campaign. He also reversed his promise to overturn Trudeau's new gun control measure that came, I think, after the Nova Scotia shootings. And the People's Party voters are really voters from, who were conservative voters, really, who thought the Conservative Party was too centrist, too left, whatever it was. And they kind of voted for the People's Party in protest. In a lot of these rural ridings, you're seeing they're getting 13% of the vote. The Conservatives could have easily gotten a much higher percentage in some of these ridings. And I think it hurt Conservatives. Those are two seats in Edmonton. Where is Edmonton? In Edmonton, Alberta, that would have been won by Conservatives. So I think in some ways there was a bit of a trade-off, because while the Conservative Party did better in the Atlantics, places like Nova Scotia, it looks like they're going to win a seat in Newfoundland. We compare those results to 2019. Definitely some gains for the Conservatives in the Atlantics region, these provinces here, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland, Foundland, whatever. So that's pretty interesting. And I'm guessing this is a liberal area of the country. Liberals tend to do very well in this area. And the Conservatives made some inroads, which makes sense. They moved left on policy. They won over more liberals. Consequentially, though, they really lost touch with the core of their base. And while a lot of Conservatives still ended up voting Conservative anyway, rural voters in places like Alberta, Saskatchewan, where the base of the Conservative Party is more right-wing, is more traditional, they were turned off by this more, liberal brand of conservatism. And now that's not to say that, a huge conservative would win in Canada. I don't think Canada's to the left of the U.S. The Overton window is to the left of where the U.S. is. Of course, the NDP, which is I guess comparable to the Bernie kind of progressive wing of the Democratic Party here in the U.S., they were supposed to do a lot better than they did. They got around 17% of the vote. In 2019, they got around 15%, so they improved a tiny bit. But overall, their seat total is exactly the same. They might pick up one seat from last time, so really not impressive gains from the New Democrats. The BQ is like a Quebec nationalist party, separatist party, although interestingly, they don't actually support Quebec's independence. They're just basically a left-wing French party in Quebec, and that's really where their base is over here. So Quebec is a fairly left-wing province from what I gather. Liberals and the BQ occupy most of the seats here. Of course, Conservatives have some areas. Something I will note, the urban-rural divide when it comes to left-right in Canada is way less pronounced than it is here in the U.S. You could see that in a lot of ways, Canada's like the U.S. was 20, 30 years ago politically. The Conservatives occupy most of the suburbs around Toronto, Montreal, Quebec City, all the cities. The Conservatives are essentially the suburban party. And in some cases, the very rural party. They're very popular out west in, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and parts of British Columbia. But in a lot of these areas, you've got areas in northern Ontario, northern Manitoba that are going for the New Democrats. Nunavut here going to the New Democrats. So that is pretty interesting. You have a lot of rural constituencies, and I don't know if that's because of the Indigenous vote going heavily for the NDP. I'm not too familiar with Canadian politics, but I do find it interesting that you have Liberals winning what seem to be pretty rural ridings here that, if this was a U.S. election, you'd think, these would be the more conservative areas, but it's definitely way less pronounced in Canada. So the whole reason Trudeau wanted this election was because he wanted to have a real mandate. He wanted to have a real majority, so he didn't need a coalition. He didn't need to team up with the New Democrats. He's still going to have a minority government, but he's probably going to get votes from the BQ and the New Democrats and the Greens anyway, and possibly even some of the Conservatives. But again, I don't really think that... I don't think O'Toole's strategy really worked, to be honest. His strategy to pivot to the left. I think it hurt him because it alienated voters in the core places, the core areas of support in Canada, the western provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, rural parts of the country that were not in favor of these more progressive policies that he's endorsed. I watched his, I guess you can't call it a concession speech, his speech after the election, and he sounded a lot like a Democrat or a liberal, and that's the approach he wanted to take to try to win over more centrist voters and even liberal voters in the cities. And while he has flipped some seats, net-wise, it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. The Conservatives actually lost 2 seats, so it really didn't pay off for him. I mean, he gained in the Atlantics, but he lost some ground in the inner cities. So it really, and even in rural areas, again, in inner cities around Edmonton, those areas. So I really think this Conservative strategy to kind of unseat Trudeau was kind of a failure. Again, you really only had 5 weeks of campaigning. I don't think somebody like Scheer... I mean, again, Scheer won the popular vote last time. O'Toole won the popular vote as well. That doesn't mean a whole lot because, again... the Conservative Party is really the only right-wing party in Canada, the People's Party too, but when you add those 2 totals up together, I'm looking at the wrong election, when you add those 2 totals up together, you're talking about a party that only gets 39% of the vote. New Democrat is a left-wing party, BQ is typically left, although I'm sure there's some French-speaking Canadians that vote for them, just because they feel they'd be best represented by them, but Canada is a center-left country, whereas you'd say America's more of a center-right country. So, again, I'm not really going to be analyzing international politics much in the future. I'm not too familiar with it. I'd say out of all the countries, I'm probably most familiar with maybe Canada and Britain's systems. I'm really not familiar with the other systems of government in other Western countries or other countries in general. I know most of them are parliamentary systems, but I don't really analyze their elections or anything like that. So this isn't something you're going to see very often on this channel. However, I thought since it is a Canadian election, it's right over the border, I figured it was relevant, and it did make a lot of news because ultimately this turned out to be a big waste of money. O'Toole was saying in his speech that this cost $600 million to hold this snap election for basically a few changes in seats, and that was basically it. So all in all, nothing really changed. The Conservatives failed to really make a huge amount of inroads. I don't know if O'Toole's going to keep his leadership in the Conservative Party. Again, nothing really changed. It seemed to be a failure like it was in 2019 to get Trudeau out. So I don't think this strategy of being, the Diet Liberal Party for the Conservatives is a really smart one. And, if the Conservatives had, perhaps moved right on a few issues, perhaps the vaccine passports, I know guns isn't a big issue in Canada, but maybe some virtue signaling on that to the right. Perhaps they would have done a little bit better. You wouldn't have had the People's Party eating up votes in core ridings like here in Edmonton probably, and they would have held on there. So I definitely think the Conservative Party probably would have done a little bit better had they been a little bit more right-wing. But again, the Conservative Party is still going to be to the left of the Republican Party. They're much more in favor of social programs in the Republican Party here in the U.S., so it's really not exactly comparable. But anyway, that's really all I have to say on this. Just thought that was interesting that the whole election really turned out to be a huge waste of money all across the board, and Trudeau didn't really get what he wanted at the end of the day anyway. Anyway, guys, thank you all for watching. I'll be doing a video on Virginia's election ads tomorrow, so that I'll put out tomorrow, and I'll just put this out today since the election was the day before. Anyway, guys, thank you all for watching. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe if you enjoyed videos and videos like this. Again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.